In 2016, classic British sci-fi series Doctor Who would go on something of a hiatus. Unlike most other gap years the show would take since its revival in 2005, where multiple specials would be aired to tide viewers over until a new series arrived, only one episode would air for the entirety of the year, the Christmas special, The Return of Dr. Mysterio. That meant an entire year with no Doctor Who on TV. Or did it? You see, while Doctor Who might have taken the year off, a new spin-off was set to premiere in its absence, with beloved author Patrick Ness acting as creator and sole writer. With a huge name already attached, and with Doctor Who fans hungry for any kind of Who content to gobble up, it seemed that this new series, titled Class, was set for success. But now, nearly 9 years since it first aired, Class has been mostly forgotten and was cancelled after a single series. The generally muted reception to the show in the years since it aired has led me to ask an important question. Why did Class fail? To answer this question, I want to look at Class as a show, as part of a franchise, and as a product put out there by the BBC. So let's get into it. Oh, and spoilers for the whole show. Duh. Part 1. Was Class even good? Not really? Okay, I don't want to mislead you guys. Class isn't a bad show per se, it's just one with a lot of wasted potential. Ness came up with a lot of really cool and unique ideas for nearly every episode of the show, but wasted them with poor implementation or intertwining them into the uninteresting main plot of the show. For example, let's talk about the second episode of the show, which is called The Coach with the Dragon Tattoo, but I like to call it Premature Ejaculation. After a lackluster first episode, we'll get to it, this episode opens really effectively with a pretty unsettling scene that sees a man skinned and eaten alive, and one of the main characters, Ram, finding that skinned body. We then see that the school's football coach has some kind of dragon tattoo that moves around his body and has blood dripping from its mouth. This is actually a great opening for this episode. We're going to talk about the tonal issues that the show has later, but this scene does a great job of establishing that, oh yeah, this is meant to be a more mature take on Doctor Who. So why do I use this as an example of missed potential? Well, to put it bluntly, this episode blows its load way too early. We get to see what the monster looks like pretty early into this episode, and it makes the already disappointing ending land like a wet fart. This episode also kills off one of the only connections the show actually had to Doctor Who to make way for one of the series' main antagonists. Frank Armitage first appeared in Series 8 of Doctor Who as the head teacher of Coal Hill School and Clara Oswald's boss, so it made sense to bring him back for a series set in Coal Hill Academy. He could have been a great ongoing comic relief character who every once in a while showed a genuine sense of duty to protect the students of Coal Hill from danger. However, it's this sense of duty that gets him killed only 2 episodes into the series, leaving him out of the rest of the show, and severing one of few ties that Class has to the parent series. Another example of a wasted concept are the petals. Oh my god. In episodes 4 and 5, co-owner of A Lonely Heart and Brave-ish Heart, which make up the show's only 2-part story, the episode introduces a creature that looks like small cherry blossom petals. These petals feast on blood in order to multiply, and is it an over-exaggeration to say that this is one of the most genius concepts I have ever seen in a piece of sci-fi media? It's one of those simple but effective and terrifying concepts you'd expect from like an early Stephen Moffat story, and I just absolutely love it. It's the kind of thing you could form an entire series around. And yet, this amazing concept feels so wasted by the fact that the petals aren't actually the focal point of the episode. It's actually about the character April and the boring main villains of the show, the Shadowkin, which means now is probably the best time to talk about the very first episode of Class, For Tonight We Might Die. Part 2. For Tonight We Might Cringe. The first episode of Class is also the worst episode of Class. While that could be seen as a good thing because it means that the show has nowhere to go but up from here, it's also a very bad thing if you're actively trying to onboard people onto your new, mature teenage drama. This episode introduces us to many of the problems that will plague this show for the rest of its run, like the awful design of the Shadowkin, the wonky writing that feels like it was written by an adult who has no grasp of how teenagers in the 2010s actually talk, jarring tonal shifts, and uninteresting characterization. In a lot of ways, the fact that a lot of this show's issues are stuffed into the first episode reminds me a lot of stuff like The Woman Who Fell to Earth or Torchwood's first episode, Everything Changes. Unlike those episodes though, For Tonight We Might Die doesn't have anything enjoyable to mask any of those elements on first viewing. The only aspects of this episode that are really enjoyable are the introduction of Miss Quill, the most interesting character in the show that we'll get to later, the setup of Ram's character arc, who is the second most interesting character in the show, and the extended cameo from Peter Capaldi as the Doctor, who is just always lovely to see on screen. Outside of that, the rest of this episode is filled with cringe writing, cringe dialogue, cringe monster design, cringe. I know using the word cringe is maybe a bit cringe nowadays, but... Now, at this point in the video, I want to discuss Class's showrunner and sole writer, Patrick Ness. Now, I already mentioned in the intro that Ness is a beloved author, well known for novels like A Monster Calls and the Chaos Walking trilogy, and to be completely honest, I have never read any of his work before. I've just never gotten around to it. Because of that, I can't really comment on how strong of a writer he is. What I can say, however, is that his writing on Class is inconsistent and messy. Sometimes the dialogue and character writing is on par with something like Torchwood, where we get a decent feel for the growing relationships between the different members of the main cast. Occasionally, we get an amazing moment that rivals some of the best exchanges of dialogue from the parent show. For example, in an episode that I'll discuss later, the story climaxes with an incredible and emotional speech from Miss Quill that explores the character and the rage that has been bubbling under the surface of her sarcastic demeanour for the entire show. Most of the time, however, characters are flat and dull, with the main cast suffocated under pained high school stereotypes, too trite to appeal to actual teenagers and too annoying to appeal to adults. It really does confuse me how the writing can vary in quality so drastically between episodes. In Doctor Who or Torchwood, this could be explained by the simple fact that multiple writers work on the show, each with their own style and quirks. Ness is, as previously mentioned, the sole writer on Class, and yet it still feels as though the show is written by a team of writers, but in the worst possible way. A team of writers so out of tune with each other, incapable of figuring out a consistent tone or style of writing for the characters or the plot of the show itself. To go back to the topic of characters, I mentioned Ram earlier because, like I said, he's one of the two characters across the whole show that is actually really interesting. Other characters like the disguised alien Charlie and his Polish boyfriend Mateusz are a bit interesting due to their relation to the main plot and through the exploration of their sexuality, or April, who has a surprisingly dark and emotional backstory. But Ram is interesting because of the changes to his character that happen throughout the show, especially in the first few episodes. Ram is set up as the typical football playing lad of the main cast, the popular boy who slags off other kids in the school that are beneath him, but who does have layers to him. We see him reaching out to very unpopular kid Tanya for help with studying, and develop a friendship with her throughout the show. Also, if you're wondering why Tanya is the only main character that I haven't really mentioned so far, it's because she's kind of a nothing character who's dealt with the most minor plot lines and cringiest dialogue, even despite basically having an entire focal episode. But back to Ram. In the first episode, Ram's girlfriend is murdered right before his eyes, in his arms actually, and it's not a simple stab or anything like that, it's an incredibly violent death. Ram is covered in her blood, and her body explodes into a pile of ash. To make matters worse, right after this, Ram loses an entire leg. He's given an alien prosthetic by the Doctor that looks like a normal leg, but he needs to adjust to it, learn to use it. Ram, as a character, has his development represented on screen by his learning how to play football again over the course of several episodes, supported by his incredibly loving father. The second episode is a focal episode for Ram as he confronts his fears in the form of his disapproving football coach, and the massive dragon that skins and eats people, of course. The third episode, which is Tanya's focal episode, sees a shape-shifting vine-like alien invade Coal Hill, and for Ram it takes the form of his dead girlfriend. His character enters a bit of a slump in the middle and back half of the show, however, as he enters a relationship with April. April as a character is fine. I mentioned her backstory, which is interesting and is explored in an effective way, and her relationship with folk music does add to her character, but her role in the main plot of the show kind of drags her down a bit. In the first episode of the show, her heart is linked with the king of the Shadowkin, Korakinus, meaning that occasionally April can see what Korakinus is up to and vice versa, making her essentially a tool to move the plot of certain episodes forward. I already mentioned that I find the Shadowkin to be an incredibly boring antagonist, and wasting what could have been a good character on them is just really disappointing. I've talked a lot about the wasted potential of this show, its concepts and its characters, but now I want to shift my focus on when the show realised this potential. While it has its moments, there are two specific episodes of the show that I want to highlight. Two episodes that come right next to each other before the finale. Two episodes that are connected to each other but form different stories. Two episodes that really showed what Class is capable of. Part 3, the character development engine, or what Class did right. I need a drink. Detained is an unusual episode. I really like it, but it still leaves me with a slight feeling of disappointment. The episode goes like this. Miss Quill locks the main cast in detention so that she can go off and do something else. A small asteroid crash lands in the classroom, displacing it outside of time and space. The asteroid begins messing with the group's emotions, and when somebody picks it up, they have to confess deep truths. Now, while the concept of this asteroid, which is actually an imprisoned force, is interesting, it does feel a little bit wasted by the fact that it feels like Ness kept adding on rules and complicating something that could have been simple yet effective. Where this episode succeeds though, is in the setting, character development, and directing. This episode, along with the next one we're going to talk about, were both directed by Wayne Che-Yip, and he does a great job. It's weird because he actually directed 3 episodes of Doctor Who as well, but he doesn't really do anything interesting in those episodes, or anything that really appeals to me. The setting of this episode is also really interesting. It's a bottle episode, taking place entirely in this one room, but the room has been ripped out of time and space, placing the group into a void of absolute nothing. The fear and panic among the cast as they try to figure out how, or even if, they can make it back to Coal Hill feels real and effective. All of the characters get their own moments throughout this episode. Ram and April's relationship breaks down under the weight of their own confessions. Tanya exposes her own insecurities that the others don't really see her as a friend. Mateusz discusses how being gay in a Polish family has impacted his relationship with his parents, and Charlie's inner conflict is brought into focus as it's revealed that, for Charlie's race, the thought of murder is just as bad as the act itself. Charlie wants to wipe out the Shadowkin as revenge for their destruction of his people, and his guilt over those thoughts is powerful enough to destroy the prisoner and return the classroom to Coal Hill, but not before the asteroid attempts to take him prisoner. It's at this point that Miss Quill, who's been established as unable to use any weapons other than her own body, walks into the classroom and shoots the asteroid, destroying it. As everyone storms out of the classroom, Charlie and Mateusz question Quill. How can she use her gun? Why is her hair longer? What's with the big scar down her eye? And what exactly did she get up to while the class was in detention? The metaphysical engine, or what Miss Quill did, comes directly after Detained, and I won't bury the lead, it's the best episode of the entire show. It succeeds in nearly everything that it sets out to do. Well-realised concepts, fleshed out characters, a compelling story. My only issue with it is that sometimes the green screening looks bad and its one major monster design isn't really that great. Outside of that, this episode shows Class firing on all cylinders. Before we really dig into that episode though, we have to talk about Miss Quill. Andrea Quill is, a quill, an alien species that originated from the same planet as Charlie's species, the Rhodians. Specifically, Miss Quill was a resistance fighter against the Rhodians and their royal family, which Charlie was the prince of. At some point, Quill was captured and her partner killed, and for her crimes, rather than simply being executed or imprisoned, she was forced to become the protector, the slave, of Charlie. And this isn't something that she could have escaped from or killed herself to prevent. She had a creature called an Arn implanted into her brain that would force her into these acts, preventing her from using her gun, and if she begins to really believe that she can remove the Arn, it starts to kill her. Painfully. Yeah, When the Shadowkin invaded their planet, Quill and Charlie were rescued by the Doctor and left on Earth, where the Shadowkin found them through a rift in space, setting off the events of the first episode and the show as a whole. At the end of the first episode, the Doctor leaves the humans in charge, and Quill, while she would like to just abandon everyone and fly off, has to stay on Earth to protect Charlie completely against her will. So when new Coal Hill head teacher Dorothea Amos offers to get Quill's arm removed, of course she takes the opportunity. And that's where this episode starts. Amos, Quill, and a mysterious man named Balin all meet in Coal Hill's assembly hall with a small device known as a metaphysical engine, which allows its users to explore manifestations of an individual's beliefs. The trio explore several locations in their journey, like the Hell of Balin's people, the Lore, where he fights their version of the devil, or the storied birthplace of the first Quill, which Balin and Andrea must kill. This is the first time throughout the show where it feels like the concept behind it is explored in an interesting and fulfilling way, while leaving room for future exploration. Throughout the episode, we also see Quill and Balin change, growing closer together. It's revealed pretty early on that Balin is a surgeon of sorts, and that he will be the one to remove Quill's arm. We also see over the course of the episode how Quill's outlook on life is changing. At the beginning, she doesn't really believe that the removal of her arm will be successful and that she will likely die, but over the course of the story, the arm begins to inflict pain upon her, symbolising that she's beginning to believe in and trust the process. After Quill's arm is removed, her first act as a free woman is to sleep with Balin. Since her enslavement, Quill hasn't been allowed to share any passionate moments. The closest she's gotten is snogging a robot in the second episode, and that doesn't really end well. The two leave the assembly hall only to discover they are not, in fact, in Coal Hill. They are inside the Cabinet of Souls, which... okay. The Cabinet of Souls is important to the main plot of the show, but all that you really need to know about it is that it contains all of the souls of the Rhodians, time passes faster inside it, and that it's currently located within the home that Charlie and Quill live in. A hologram of Amos tells the pair that only one of them was supposed to survive, and that the two should fight to the death so that one may escape before they die of old age. She leaves behind Quill's gun, and then the hologram disappears. What I love about this scene is that, rather than having Quill and Balin argue over what they should do and then escalating that into the two fighting, the fight scene is interspersed with the argument. It's a really interesting direction to take this scene and reinforces the fact that we already know how this is all going to end. We've seen the end of Detained. We know Quill survives and is angry about it, so when Balin grabs the gun, fires, and it backfires on him, we already knew how this was going to go. The metaphysical engine is the best example of what Class could be capable of when it's going all in with its concepts, its themes, and its characters, and had the show gone on for another series, maybe we could have seen more episodes on a similar level of quality as this. But it didn't. Part 4. Outside Forces, a Conclusion. For a while after the series finale, The Lost, aired, it was up in the air as to whether or not Class would continue. Initially, it seemed like Patrick Ness would return as writer as showrunner, while also introducing outside writers in a structure that more resembled Doctor Who and its other two major spin-offs. Eventually, though, it was announced that Ness was stepping away from the show. Despite this, work on a second series was still underway, with writers like Juno Dawson and Derek Landy of Skullduggery Pleasant fame pitching some interesting ideas. Despite these names, Class would end up cancelled less than a year on from its premiere. I know that I've complained about the show quite a bit, criticised its wonky writing, its underwhelming plot lines, and its wasted concepts, but I still think I like this show. I started this video off by saying that Class isn't really a good show, and I do kind of stand by that. It's going to be hard to find an audience for a show when every episode jumps so drastically in tone and atmosphere. Sometimes it's a gory horror show that meditates on fear and life after tragedy. Sometimes it's a sci-fi epic that delves into freedom, identity, and love. Sometimes it feels like an episode of the Sarah Jane Adventures with some blood and swear words mixed in. Hi, it's Editing Ash. I just wanted to put a little note here because I know that this is something that people are going to talk about in the comments. I know I just said it's hard to onboard people into a show that changes so drastically between each episode, and you could argue that Doctor Who does the exact same thing. My issue here with Class, though, is that it jumps so drastically despite being a very singular TV show that's helmed by one person and is trying to go for a very specific tone, which is, your mature teenage drama type thing. If I had to compare it to something, I would say Skins. Hear me out. Skins is a show that veers wildly between plot and tone, but it still manages to feel consistent. Class doesn't across its 8 episodes. So when I say that it veers wildly between writing and tone, I don't mean in the same kind of way that something like Doctor Who does. Thanks. Please don't kill me in the comments. If you can gel with all of that, there's a lot of good stuff to be found here. Compelling character arcs, fun comedy, and genuine scares. I didn't touch on the series finale, but I think it's worth noting that it's also pretty good, wrapping up a story I didn't care about in a way that made me care. That means that the last 3 episode stretch of this show is bangers back to back, but it also means that the show ends on a cliffhanger with no continuation of the main story across any medium. A few years back, Big Finish did launch a series of class audio stories, but these take place concurrently with the events of the show, not offering up any kind of resolution to any of the dangling plot threads, much like the trio of books that were published alongside the show. While it may be tempting to pin Class's cancellation on all of the issues with the writing that I've already mentioned, I think it's worth noting the outside forces that almost definitely contributed to its low ratings. For one, the marketing. Now, I am basing this on nearly 10-year-old memories, so you can take this with a pinch of salt, but I don't remember Class being advertised nearly as much as it should have. When I compare it to my memories of Torchwood and the Sarah Jane Adventures, I definitely remember those 2 shows being marketed pretty heavily. I remember trailers and adverts and ads in magazines, but I remember none of that for Class. I don't remember even hearing about it until a couple of months before it aired, and after it aired, all that I remember seeing was a clip of the Doctor's cameo in episode 1 on YouTube, and then I never heard anything about it again until the Big Finish audios came out. Another thing worth noting, which I think is a way larger contributor to Class's failure than I think a lot of people like to talk about, is the fact that it aired on BBC Three. At one point in time, BBC Three would have been the perfect place for a show like Class to air. It was fairly popular, aimed towards teenagers and young adults, it had aired shows in a similar style to Class, like Being Human. Hell, the first series of Torchwood was commissioned for the channel. But in early 2016, due to budget cuts at the BBC, 3 was removed from the air and replaced by a sort of streaming platform of the same name. While streaming wasn't exactly an alien concept in 2016, it hadn't been totally adopted by the vast majority of the population yet, and because of this, BBC 3 saw a steep decline in viewers, and just a few months later, Class first aired on the platform. The show would eventually be rerun with its first proper TV broadcast late at night on BBC One in January 2017, but it still failed to draw in the ratings that the BBC expected. I think this, above the poor marketing, and perhaps above all of the show's actual issues, might have been the true death knell behind Class. The show always felt destined to die off after its first series, despite the work put into it, and that's a damn shame. Its last 3 episodes proved that, with a slight adjustment to the formula, this show could be something not just good, but great. Class will almost definitely never come back. Big Finish might produce more audio stories, Doctor Who might reference characters, events, or monsters that appeared in the show, but the show as it was is dead with no real chance of coming back. And it's a shame, because God knows how many stories on the level of the metaphysical engine we could have gotten if not for its cancellation. So that was Class, a show that was as contradictory as it was genuinely enjoyable. Following its cancellation, Patrick Ness would continue publishing successful original novels, and the main cast of the show would appear in a variety of films and TV series. Most notably, Vivian Oparah would go on to have an award-winning role in the fantastic rom-com Rye Lane as Yaz. As for the Series 2 writers, Derek Landy is kept working on his Skullduggery Pleasant books, and Juno Dawson would go on to work on several Doctor Who related audio stories, helming much of the Redacted series for BBC Sounds, writing a couple of Torchwood stories for Big Finish. She would write one of only 3 new series adventure novels for the 13th Doctor, and just this year was announced as one of the writers for Series 15 of Doctor Who. And yes, I'm calling it Series 15 and not Season 2, there's already a Season 2, moving the show to a new streaming platform isn't a good enough reason to reset the show back to Season 1, Disney. Class will probably never come back, and it may have not have gotten the chance to realise its full potential, but it seems like the people behind it went on to do great things, and for that, I'm glad. And for what it's worth, they made a pretty half-decent show, all things considered. Hey, so this is post filming Ash. just here to say thank you to everybody who was subscribed to this channel and waited for another long-form video like this. Things have been pretty hectic for me over the past few months. I'm in my last year of uni, which is something I constantly mention, but I've also had some stuff going on in my personal life that's been pretty rough, that really put the production of this video back a bit. But I'm back, at least for this one video. I'm probably going to be gone for another while after this, because I'm grinding out this essay, this dissertation and my major project. I'm just really trying to get past this last year of uni. But thank you all for watching. If you're new to this channel, I do want to actively do more episodes, do more videos about things that are Doctor Who related, so definitely stick around for that. And if you're just here to see me talk about video games, I will be talking about video games soon, I promise. Just give me a little bit of time. I have a few videos in my head that I'm gonna get out there, hopefully this year. There will definitely be at least one other video this year, but there will probably be more. I bought this DVD just as a prop for this video, so actual money went into this video. It was only like £3, but that's not the point. Thank you so much for watching. That's about as much as I can say. I hope I'll see you guys soon. Thank you.